This is another sign of the times, an analysis, and a commentary. No economic growth, no world. So, could the world order survive without growing? It's hard to imagine now, but humanity made do with little or no economic growth for thousands of years. In Byzantium and Egypt, income per capita at the end of the first millennium was lower than at the dawn of the Christian era. Much of Europe experienced no growth at all in the 500 years that preceded the Industrial Revolution. In India, real incomes per person shrank continuously from the early 17th to the late 19th century, as world leaders gather in Paris to hash out an agreement to hold down and ultimately stop the emissions of heat-trapping greenhouse gases that threaten to make Earth increasingly inhospitable for humanity. There is a question that is unlikely to be openly discussed at the 2-week conclave convened by the United Nations, but it is nonetheless hanging in the air. Could civilization, as we know it, survive such an experience again? The answer simply is no. Economic growth took off consistently around the world only some 200 years ago. Two things powered it: innovation and lots of carbon-based energy, most of it derived from fossil fuels like coal and petroleum. Staring at climatic upheaval approaching down the decades, environmental advocates, scientists, and some political leaders have put the proposal on the table. World consumption must stop growing. This is a subtle and largely unacknowledged part of some folks' environmental climate plan, said Michael Greenstone, who directs the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago. Sometimes it is not so subtle. A Stanford ecologist has been arguing for decades that we must slow both population and consumption growth. Philosopher Kenneth Boulding said, "Anyone who believes exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist." The proposal that growth must stop appears frequently along the leftward edge of the environmental movement in publications like Dissent and the writing of the environmental advocate Bill McKibben. It also shows up in academic literature. For instance, Peter Victor of York University in Canada published a study titled Growth, Degrowth, and Climate Change, a scenario analysis in which he compared Canadian carbon emissions under 3 economic paths to the year 2035. Limiting growth to zero, he found, had a modest impact on carbon spewed into the air. Only the degrowth situation, in which Canadians' income per person shrank to its level in 1976 and the average working hours of employed Canadians declined by 75%, managed to slash emissions in a big way. And it is creeping into international diplomacy, showing up forcibly in India's demand for carbon space in the rich world, which, at its logical limit, would demand that advanced nations deliver negative emissions, suck more carbon out of the atmosphere than they put in, so the world's poor countries could burn their way to development as the rich countries have done for the last 2 centuries. Working for the Sustainable Development Commission, set up in 2001 to advise the Labour government in Britain, Tim Jackson of the University of Surrey provided a nifty calculation. Accept that citizens of developing nations are entitled to catch up with the living standards of Europeans by mid-century, and assume that Europe will grow on average by 2% a year between now and then, to stay within the 2-degree centigrade, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit average temperature increase that scientists generally consider the upper bound to avoid catastrophic climate change would require the world economy in 2050 to emit no more than 6 grams of carbon dioxide for every dollar of economic output. To put that in perspective, today, the United States economy emits 60 times that much. The French economy, one of the most carbon efficient because it is powered extensively by nuclear energy, emits 150 grams per dollar of output. In other words, that's something that would be very hard to accomplish. Drawing what he saw as the inevitable conclusion, Professor Jackson published a book in 2009 called Prosperity Without Growth. So then, whatever the ethical merits of the case, the proposition of no growth has absolutely no chance to succeed. In other words, the modern world has to be always growing, or it will not survive as we know it. For all the many hundreds of years humanity survived without growth, modern civilization could not. The trade-offs that are the daily stuff of market-based economies simply could not work in a zero-sum world. It would be a non-starter to have zero growth within a given country in terms of creating conflict between groups. If one were to take this further and make it international, it feels like an even bigger stretch. Let's examine what our fossil fuel growth has provided us. It has delivered gains in living standards in even the poorest regions of the world. But that's only the beginning. Economic development was indispensable to end slavery. It was a critical precondition for the empowerment of women. Indeed, democracy would have not survived without it. As Martin Wolf, the Financial Times commentator, has noted, the option for everybody to become better off, where one person's gain didn't require another's loss, was critical for the development and spread of consensual politics that underpin democratic rule. Zero growth gave us Genghis Khan and the Middle Ages, conquest and subjugation. It fostered an order in which the only mechanism to get ahead was to plunder one's neighbor. Economic growth opened up a much better alternative, trade. The Oxford economist Max Roser has some revealing charts that show the deadliness of war across the ages. It was a real killer in the era of no growth. Up to half of all deaths among hunter-gatherers, horticulturists, and other ancient cultures were caused by conflict. The bloody 20th century, staged for 2 world wars, the Holocaust, and other war-based genocides, still doesn't even come close. So, what to do? In a world economy that does not grow, the powerless and vulnerable are the most likely to lose. Imagine Blade Runner, Mad Max, and The Hunger Games brought to real life. The good news is that taking action against climate change need do no such thing. It will not be easy, but we can glimpse technological paths that will allow civilization to keep growing and afford the world economy a positive sum future. More than how to stop growth, the main question brought out by climate change is how to fully develop and deploy sustainable energy technologies. In a nutshell, to help the world's poor and everybody else onto a path to progress that doesn't rely on burning buried carbon. In other words, right now is the time for real changes. Everything that must change quickly or rapidly and for the better, because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. And that should be a very important question to ask. Again, Revelation chapter 9. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. 2. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. 3. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. 4. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those humans which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. 5. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he strikes a human. 6. And in those days shall humans seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Revelation chapter 16, verse 15. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. 16. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Yes, it's time for the physical and spiritual manifestation of the book of Revelation. And again, all these are more signs. It really is about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. And yes, that should be a very important question to ask. Abba Father, Amen.